My lords, our esteemed scientists have developed a stellar weapon of unfathomable power. It transcends the previously thought of physical limitations of our galaxy and is capable of delivering a cataclysmic strike through the fabric of spacetime itself. Witness its power as I test fire it on a Blorg colony system. Truly, the precursors themselves would weep at the power levels humanity has reached. The weapon I discuss today is designated the Stellar Cannon, and in today's report I'll demonstrate its world-ending power. But we also need to discuss some serious issues with the device. This report will assist you, my lords, in deciding whether it's worth funding at all. So how does it work? The Stellar Cannon is the work of Dr. Grunt, working under the leadership of Dr. Eladrin. They brought this weapon of stellar destruction into reality. It is a multi-stage megastructure that must be constructed around pulsars or a neutron star. I'm told these star types are required due to the sheer difference in power output. For those interested in astrophysics, the Crab pulsar outputs over 13 million% more energy than Sol, and this cannon really drinks up the power. Unlike many late-game megastructures, the Stellar Cannon can be acquired much earlier. It is a so-called kilo structure on the same technology level as an arc furnace, and is actually quite simple to acquire. It's a mere Tier 2 technology, with no prerequisite tech. This means that to roll the technology, you only need to have completed 6 Tier 1 technologies before Tier 2 tech can begin to roll. It's rare, of course, which reduces the chance relative to the other Tier 2 techs, but nevertheless, with a little bit of luck, this can be gained quite early indeed. Interestingly, your scientists are much more likely to discover how to build one of these if they have either the Spark of Genius trait or the Maniacal trait. The initial site will cost you 4,000 alloy and 300 influence. It takes approximately 5 years to construct. An inconsequential resource investment, to be frank, but once the site is constructed, you need to spend another 3,000 alloys and 5 years building it to stage 2, or the first initial stage of the gun. 3,000 more alloys will get you to the middle stage, and a final investment of 10,000 alloys will get you to the final stage. In total, this will cost you 20,000 alloys, 300 influence, and 20 years to build. Its value is indeed yet to be determined, my lords, but compared to official Stellaris merchandise, it's left in the dust. The Clothing Megacorp has deemed me worthy to present you these items. If you would like to order this gorgeous Swolfin towel or Blorg blanket, please click the link in the description or the pinned comment. But what are the Stellar Cannon's capabilities? Some base stats first. It takes 140 days to fire, which is quite an issue since any self-respecting admiral will simply move the fleet out of the target system should they be targeted by the cannon. But more on that later. The cost to fire is also significant. It uses your entire energy stockpile. Everything. Whether you have 50,000 energy or 1,000,000 energy, it consumes it all. But it will do damage scaling with the amount of energy used. If more than 50,000 energy is consumed, it has a terraforming element to it. Every planet will move up a step on the heat scale, i.e. an Arctic world becomes an ocean world, and an ocean world becomes a desert world, barren into molten. This is very much a secondary feature, but it may be a viable if somewhat niche strategy that we can explore later on. Can we defend against it, I hear you ask? Well, somewhat. The Defense Grid supercomputer will block 60% of the damage to defences, and the Planetary Shield Generator blocks 90% of the damage to planets and can prevent the terraforming element as well. All of that is of course wonderful, but ultimately it's fluff, because what we care about is the primary function. How much damage can the cannon do? Well, Tier 1 offers 1 ship damage per 100 energy spent, on top of 10% devastation to planets, assuming you fired over 10,000 energy of course. Tier 2 offers 1 ship damage per 50 energy spent and 25% devastation, and Tier 3, the final stage, offers 1 ship damage per 10 energy spent and 50% devastation. The tiers also come with extra bonuses such as ship fire rate and energy storage bonuses, but these aren't really relevant to the cannon, so let's move on. Is it worth it? Well, let's get into that. Early game. We will of course make some assumptions here, but let's assume we rolled the tech quite early, around 2220, and we build a tier 1 cannon. At tier 1, remember we are going to do 1 ship damage per 100 energy spent, meaning if we have 20,000 energy, it will do approximately 200 damage per ship. 20k energy for 1 shot, not to mention the alloy and tech cost to build the cannon. At this point in the galaxy, I would say that's quite a substantial input. The outcome, I think, is rather poor indeed. Of course, the difficulty settings will have some sway here, but for context, a mining drone has approximately 450 hull and 1500 armor, meaning your shot will barely scratch them. A basic corvette has a combined defense of around 600. Again, you're just not really hurting these, and this is the weakest military ship at the weakest point in the game. At this stage, I would say it's fundamentally quite useless. Even if we bumped up our energy credits to 50,000, it's still a measly 500 damage, and is that worth the cost? I don't think it is. So let's move to the mid-game and assume we upgrade it to level 2. Level 2 is effectively twice the damage output per energy credit versus level 1. Now the cost of upgrading it is relatively cheap, but it's also worth pointing out that if you spent 10,000 alloys to get to this stage, you could have also built 100 corvettes, which I would suggest would be significantly more valuable. At 50,000 energy, we will do 1,000 damage per shot, which will destroy a corvette fleet equipped with tier 4 defenses, but any ship class above corvette will simply shrug off the damage. There are terraforming implications, but I'll discuss those later on. It is highly unlikely that you will face a scenario where destroying a corvette fleet is important, and considering that the fleet can just move out of the system during the 140-day charge-up time, I'd suggest while a nice experiment, this is still basically just a waste of resource. So let's move on again to the late game. Now we've upgraded to level 3, the final tier, and we are doing 1 damage per 10 energy spent. 20,000 energy is doing 2,000 damage per ship, and 50,000 is doing 5,000 damage per ship. However, given that it's late game, I think we can stretch to 100,000 energy a shot, meaning we will be pumping out 10k damage per shot. Now, this is significant. You're going to destroy any ship below a cruiser with the press of a button. But 100,000 energy isn't nothing. Is that worth it? I'm not sure, because remember you're charged when you click the button, and the fleet has 140 days to simply leave the system. On one hand, if you do indeed catch the fleet, you'll certainly soften it up, which is great, but maybe it's better to be looking at starbases, defense platforms, and deep space citadels, since they can't move. I invite you to view a previous report, the Unkillable Bastion. How would that fare against this new cannon? Well, with great success. Firstly, defense platforms have in the region of 20,000 combined defenses, so you'd need a minimum of 200,000 energy to destroy them. Starbases and DSCs have hundreds of thousands, so they're not even worth discussing at this point. But we also then have the Defense Grid supercomputer, which offers 60% protection, meaning 200,000 energy isn't enough. So why don't we move on to the hyper late game? Now in reality, hyper late game is just a reflection of how much energy you can store. Using the above test, 500,000 energy, 500,000, gives us 50,000 damage, which will destroy all of the platforms in our Unkillable Bastion system. Though I should point out the Zeroni Stormcaster removes the armor, it's a bit of a moot point regardless. The DSC and Starbases, however, they're a much harder nut to crack. They have several 100,000 in hull, armor and shield, on top of the 60% reduction in damage from the Defense Grid supercomputer. To be precise, this DSC has a combined 437,000 in defensive stats, meaning you need to fire 4.37 million energy credits at the system to destroy it, and that assumes no defense grid supercomputer, which it is almost certainly going to have. So to actually kill it, you need closer to 7 million energy credits. Is this really achievable and worth it to kill a Bastion system? Perhaps. Perhaps not. I would suggest at best it's handy to weaken a Bastion system prior to engaging with your fleets. The cannon is absolutely not a super weapon that wins you the war, but it is a supporting artillery your fleet admirals will thank you for. Destroying all the defensive platforms is certainly worth it, and that only required 500,000 energy. That said, 500,000 energy is still a lot of energy. But let's move on to the terraforming element of the cannon, because we've discovered that to be useful in combat you need ungodly levels of energy. But what about the terraforming element? This does have some potential. After all, terraforming enemy planets and making it an objectively worse place to live will have a detrimental effect on your enemy. In order for the weapon to unlock its terraforming abilities, 50,000 energy must be fired, and the planets must not be shielded. This feature also appears to not work at the lower ranks of the cannon, though whether intended or not I'm unsure, it's just something I noticed in testing. The terraforming ability of the device is, I think, a bit odd in the way that it functions. On screen I'm showing you the various interactions between planet types. Ocean becomes desert, but you cannot heat a desert beyond this point. And I must ask, why not? Furthermore, worlds like Gaia are seemingly untouchable. For some bizarre reason we can't ruin them. I ask again, why not? If I want to shoot my stellar cannon at a holy world and boil its seas, why can't I do that? Now, changing planet classes may be somewhat insignificant, however. This certainly becomes considerably less valuable the later in the technological cycle we are, because ascended empires are far less likely to suffer ill effects from a mere change in the weather. I'm talking about robotic ascension, or even genetic ascension in some cases. I think the most valuable feature of this is in its ability to change barren worlds to molten worlds, purely for the reason to construct an arc furnace. Arc furnaces are absolutely the powerhouses of stellar economies, and they work off the potential number of stellar bodies in a system, but also require a molten world with which to build them upon. If you have no molten world, well, you're out of luck, but using the cannon, perhaps not. This is of course very niche, but it could be rather valuable in this specific case. As a weapon to terraform planets, I think it's rather on the mild side, and I also must go further and vent my frustration at our scientists' inability to create a weapon that can crack worlds from afar, rather than simply give them a gentle tickle. And of course I've already mentioned my frustration with the inability to heat worlds up beyond desert. But let's move on. The cannon also has a number of special interactions. Firstly, if fired at the Elder Voidspawn, this is the creature that spawns in to challenge a behemoth. Rather than taking any damage, the Voidspawn simply absorbs the shot and channels it into energy, giving it an increased 25% in speed. Marvellous really, and quite amusing should this happen to any unsuspecting empire. And furthermore, what a roundabout way to challenge a behemoth empire. If you cannot kill the behemoth, fire at the Voidspawn, give it a boost, and maybe the enemy of my enemy is indeed your friend after all. I will however state my slight disappointment that there appears to be no interaction between the cannon and the Stellar Devourer. Considering the Stellar Devourer literally eats stars, imagine what would happen if we fired the cannon at it. It would have the best meal of its life. The Contingency proved they're worthy of the Endgame Crisis title by simply redirecting a shot. Should you attempt to fire the device at a Contingency hub, they just say no. The shot will instead be redirected towards another non-Contingency occupied system. This may be an ally, and I wonder how that conversation would go at Galcom. I stress this only affects Contingency systems with hubs inside. You can shoot at the fleets all you like, although as we demonstrated earlier, unless you have Shroud deity power levels, you're unlikely to do more than just annoy them. If fired at a system with an extra-dimensional portal, i.e. the place where the Unbidden enter our galaxy, rather than doing any damage to the portal, a new fleet will emerge. Clearly, it acts like a giant lure, literally beckoning in more and more extra-dimensionals by showing them just how much power we have for them to feed upon. Again, you could use this to your advantage. It's quite a roundabout way to kill your enemy if they happen to have the portal spawn near their borders. Of course, you'll still have to deal with the fleets at some point. The Scourge appear to have no defense against the cannon. Maybe the cannon is the hunters after all, though I stress this is mostly just tickling them anyway, because unless you have ungodly levels of energy, you're not going to be able to destroy the ships. But finally, Cetana, the synthetic queen. Now, given that Cetana's Colossus is easily the strongest soul ship in the galaxy, I don't even want to calculate the billions of energy you would need to hurt her. Nevertheless, if you fire the cannon at Cetana, the first time you do it, the shot will do no damage. If, however, you write that off as a simple mishap, we'll fire a second time, and she will redirect the shot right back to your capital system, once again demonstrating Cetana's insane levels of power compared to any other crisis level event. So, to conclude, should you build one? I would say yes, but I would not make it a priority. Ships, fleets, and guns, with lots of men and women to operate them, they win you wars, my lords. The cannon is certainly a useful tool. A button to win a war, it is not. I do think it's worthy of construction later in an empire's lifespan, where they can build the empire reserves required to properly utilize the cannon. Firing it when it's not at maximum level, in my eyes, is largely a waste of resources, unless you face a very niche horde of nanites or corvettes, and that in itself is its big problem. For softening up a fleet before an engagement, or demolishing defense platforms, it's a good shout. Just like the Swolfin Towel. Links in the description, folks.